when it comes to sensuality, you as a woman are responsible for reconnecting with your own body. That's not your husband's job, and it's not even an option. You need to have the direct relationship to your body and your own sensuality and bring that to the table. And when you do, you'll find your husband is suddenly a much better lover.
Welcome to the Midlife Reinvention Podcast. I'm your host, Kavita, and the founder of Power Purpose Play, a global community of women in midlife. I'm here to tell you that it's your time now to rediscover what has always been inside of you and bring that out into the world. If you're wondering what's next, but don't know quite what that is, or if you feel a twinge in your heart telling you that you have so much more to do and so much more to offer, you're in the right place. Ask yourself, if not now, when? Do you want to leave your job, start your own business, take control of your health, reignite the passion in your marriage, write that book, or at least that first chapter? Transitions like this can be daunting, but through listening to my story and interviews with incredible women every week, I hope to inspire you to take action. I rediscovered myself after the age of 50, and I know you can too. It's my time now to help you do just that. I'm so excited you're here. Let's dive in. I'm really pleased to be introducing you to our amazing guest today, Alexandra Stockwell. Alexandra is a relationship and intimacy expert who helps couples build beautiful, stable, long-lasting, sexy relationships. And she is the bestselling author of Uncompromising Intimacy and the creator of the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program. Alexandra has been featured in the Huffington Post, USAToday, Cosmopolitan, Business Insider, Fox News, NYC, and many other publications. So through our conversation today, we will be exploring the common misunderstandings about emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy. And so I'm just really excited to have you here. Welcome, Alexandra. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. It's such an important topic. And I think when we get to midlife, we know there's so much more to learn, but it's not clear where to learn it. So I'm really glad you're providing this platform.
Thank you. Thank you. I know, I really think your expertise is so relevant for our audience because especially as we approach midlife and beyond, we might often be in long-term relationships, which while they may be loving and understanding, I think some of us have lost the intimacy and the excitement in our relationships. So I think I'd love to hear from you how we get that back. But before I do, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got started and how you came to do what you're doing now.
Okay, I would be happy to share my story, but I'm really excited because something happened just 2 days ago. And when it happened, I thought, I'm going to share it with this audience.
For sure.
So as you'll hear, I teach that it is absolutely possible to either maintain or rekindle passion that grows with every year and every decade. I myself will soon be celebrating my 25th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really believe relationships can continue to improve. They don't have to plateau or start to diminish. Mm-hmm. And I recently had a woman join my Facebook group, which is called Heat Up Your Marriage. And she's been married for 53 years.
Oh my God.
She shared that they recently had a new awakening in their relationship and everything is sexier and hotter and juicier.
Wow. That's incredible.
53 years. So I just want to put that up front and center in this conversation because in the work that I do, I definitely receive questions from people along the lines of what point do people stop having sex and is it even possible and all these things. So before I go into my story, I just want to catch your attention and tell you about this woman who I don't even know that much about her. She just joined my Facebook group and is excited to be in a community where people care about commitment and honoring the integrity of a life together and also having things juicy and passionate, because those often seem like they're divergent values.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This must have been very rewarding for you.
It was.
Because especially since you said you didn't really know her, and it just like seems like you've just made a big impact in her life, which is awesome.
Actually, she's not a client of mine. She's just a woman who asked to join my Facebook group.
Fantastic.
And so she has done this on her own. I'm actually planning to interview her because she is exhibit A of the principles that I teach. It's just that I know this works for couples who've been married for 35 years, close to 40, but I just never encountered someone having these new awakenings and renewed passion 53 years into a marriage. So my own story is that I am a child of divorce. My parents were divorced when I was 9, and my step-parents were divorced and married multiple times. My husband, his parents were divorced. And so I went into marriage basically in love with my husband, with a good relationship, and assuming that we would get divorced. Like, I wasn't that conscious initially, but then I became conscious because I was listening to what was in my head as I was taking care of my infant daughter. And I was like mentally taking notes so that later, when my husband and I were divorced, I could tell her how happy we were in the early years of our marriage. And so I had this recording dialogue happening in my head.
Yeah.
While I also in my head was totally enjoying how beautiful it was and how much I loved him and how collaborative we were. So I first of all needed, at some point, I realized we're not necessarily going to get divorced. And this was the seed that has led to my real conviction that having fantastic relationships is a completely learnable skill. And most of us do not learn it in our childhoods, either through our parents modeling, even if they get along well. That's totally different than having a fantastic relationship.
Right.
And we don't learn it in school. There aren't books. There's no role models. As mammals, we learn through role models. And so I really was clear I wanted to have a relationship, which was not some happily ever after Disney story, but a relationship which was a context for each of us to continue to grow individually and together and become more alive, more of service, and more gratified throughout the course of our lives as we got to know one another and built more history. And I could become familiar with new aspects of my soul because I was in a relationship where they were revealed. And so I set about figuring out how to do that. And this was not some linear sequential experience. I should add that my husband and I met in medical school. Early in our relationship, we were both working 60 to 100 hours a week. Then we had the first 2 of our 4 children pretty early in our relationship. And so we didn't have time to linger and luxuriate in sensual connection. We were both super ambitious, focused, achieving individuals. And at a certain point, while I was practicing medicine, I realized I have been driven, I have been goal-oriented, I have developed all kinds of competence, and I had achieved everything on my both explicit and implicit wish list, or not really bucket list. That usually means things like going to the moon.
Yeah.
I hadn't done that, but I had a wonderful husband. I had a growing family with healthy, beautiful children. I had a career I loved. I was stable in my career. I paid off my educational loans. We had a mortgage, but that was our only debt. And I thought I really should have some sense of satisfaction, fulfillment, contentment. And I was in my mid-30s, and I anticipated pretty much living the same way for another 4 decades. And I just thought that's never going to work for me.
Right.
And I'm sometimes asked, especially for people who are familiar with what happens for so many physicians, then I'm asked, did I experience burnout? And the answer is no, I did not experience burnout. I really was listening at the level of a whisper. And I think it's the kind of phenomenon in one way or another that often happens for women in midlife, where it's like, okay, I've done all this work, I've cared for the people, I've created what I've created, whether it's remarkable professional accomplishments or what you've created is being really good at taking care of your family. Like whatever it is, it's what you chose to do, you're good at it. And now what?
And you don't take care of yourself, right? You've kind of forgotten maybe how to take care of yourself. Is that right?
Well, yes. Although for me at the time, it wasn't even that I didn't know how to take care of myself. It's that it just wasn't on the menu. The
Right.
way that I said it to myself then was that I prioritized my patients over my family and my family over myself. And I knew enough to know that the reverse order was the biggest win-win, that my patients would get more if I took care of myself, took care of my family, and then took care of them. And the other thing is that it wasn't time management. I was doing so many things. I was very good with time management.
Right.
It was more of a consciousness shift. So what I actually did was it took a while. I don't know that it was so many months, but in internal time, it felt like it took a long time.
Yeah.
And I dialed down my practice and set things up to take a 1-year sabbatical, although I knew I probably wouldn't return, but I wasn't ready to say so.
Right.
And then for the first time in my life, I gave myself permission to do things without a clear reason, without a clear objective, without a clear relationship to some important goal of mine. I took dance classes, which when I did had no purpose other than I liked how it felt, and which in those days was not a purpose. And I did various spiritual trainings. I did more conventional trainings. I still wasn't that I was living a life of leisure. I was raising at that point 3 children, running a household. I had kids in school. I was married. Like there was still plenty to do, but internally I had spaciousness and logistically I had a little bit more time as well. And one thing led to another. And a few years later, I took a course on sensuality and sexuality for my own purposes.
Right.
Like I was like, okay, we have figured out collaborative communication. We make financial decisions well. We know how to support one another. We are really good companions in life. And I want the heat. I want the passion. I want what the poets talk about. I want when we have sex that afterwards, my soul is expanded. I want to have the kind of sex that afterwards we feel closer and during we emotionally feel some sense of union that at that point was still elusive to me. So I took this training in order to tap in for myself. And it just so happened that it doubled as a coach training as well. In other words, there were lay people and people who were taking the program in order to become professional coaches. And at the time, I was an MD. I knew about athletic coaches. I didn't know what a coach was, and it really didn't matter. I didn't even ask any questions about that aspect of things. I was really focused on expanding my sensuality and making sure this was going to be a place where I was comfortable doing that. Well, comfortable isn't quite the right word, but I think you know what I mean.
That's amazing. That's amazing that you took the time to really figure that out, because I think that's one of the things that we really stress is that when you're approaching change in your life, if you're going to figure out what you really want to do, you need to take the time and listen and do things like you did, like the dance class or whatever, and things will click, right? So it sounds like when you took this course, it clicked. It was something that you're like, this is what I want to do. It's not only helped you, but you want to help other people, right?
Well, when I started it, I didn't think about other people. I mean,
Okay.
it was, I don't even think I told anyone I was taking the course except my husband. Maybe I told one friend, but I never discussed sex with my mother until I'd already had 2 children. Like that now it's who I am, that I talk about sex and sensuality. And if anyone is listening and you can't see me, I'm 52. I am definitely overweight. I have silver hair. I am not the typical image of the sex expert.
Right.
And yet, and in fact, it's not even that I'm a sex expert. What I want is to anyone who's interested, I'm devoted to helping you experience passion, which is actually not just sex. Sex is kind of the final delicious frontier that comes with self-knowledge, self-acceptance, and the capacity to be vulnerable and develop emotional intimacy. But that none of that was on my mind. Let me spell it out a little bit more. Up until this point, if my husband said anything about our marriage other than the fact that we were married and how many children we had, I would feel a little bit affronted that he was revealing something private to other people. Really? Now, you, Kavita, know I post about my sex life. I post about the way my husband looks at me. I post about awkwardness, like, because it's funny, but I think of it now as part of my purpose. But as a physician and the woman with the personality I had and the conditioning and the training, my purpose was to keep all of that completely separate and under the table, even from ourselves. Like, part of this journey included learning how to actually talk with one another, my husband and I, how to have a conversation about sex, which wasn't the most cringeworthy thing. And we just needed to do it, but then be done to have the relief of turning to something else. Like, that is where I started. So I did not anticipate, I had zero interest in the part of this training that I was doing that was about coaching and being able to help other people. So at one point, because it was actually very artfully blended in the program, the coach training and the sensuality training that was anyway available, they were artfully blended. And so I got a little curious and I thought, well, let me just go to a lab. So at least a coaching lab. And so at least I know what we're talking about.
I was going to say, what kind of lab did you go to?
Well, we did a variety of things. I'll just say that there were 150 students in this program, and I was the only one who was married with children. Right. There were people who were divorced with and without children and newly married. So, but I was the only person driving home to the suburbs to pack school lunches and make sure homework was done. So I kind of kept my home life under wraps and was thrilled to be able to learn from people whose lives were very different than mine, very edgy and polyamorous and mostly younger and just not professionally aspiring or responsible by my standards at that time. It was a whole, like, I used to call it the underbelly, but then I had somebody comment that was offensive. So I don't use that word anymore, but I will in this context because it took courage to walk in that door. Right. But I knew that they had something that I wanted.
Amazing.
And then once I went to the lab and practiced coaching, which a lot of that practice was just learning how to have conversations that facilitated transformation and made room for someone else's desires to emerge in a way that they could honor. And once I started doing that, I realized, oh, like, this is the part of medicine I miss most.
That's an amazing
It's built
story.
on connection. And I
Yeah.
thought, okay, I'm diving in.
That's awesome. That's so great that you found your purpose, and that's all that we're here about. And I wanted to get back, if I could, to, I think a lot of your focus is on long-term, like we discussed, long-term loving relationships. And one of my questions is, how do we kind of escape the trap of becoming roommates with your spouse? I know that in your teachings, you talked about 3 different types of intimacy. So there's the emotional, sensual, and erotic. Can you kind of go through those with us to help us understand? Maybe those can help us understand how to get out of this kind of roommate syndrome that some of us may be in.
Absolutely. And I really like how you asked that question, because what I'm saying isn't true for one night stands, for quickie affairs,
Mm-hmm.
or early in a relationship, because there's a kind of an excitement and an electricity that can happen that does not in any way require emotional intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
But in a long-term committed relationship,
Yes.
where you are together every day, you build your lives together, there's so much overlap. What tends to happen, and it's the most common advice given,
Mm-hmm.
is that we compromise
Yes.
and you hold back on something that either matters a little or matters a lot, just to keep the peace, to have your partner be comfortable. You
Mm-hmm.
know, he likes his eggs scrambled well, and even though you like them a little runny, like, it's just not worth the trouble. And so
Right.
15 years later, you realize you haven't had runnier eggs, because that's just not how you do it.
Right.
And the thing is, he's probably compromising in a lot of ways as well. But if we're talking about a heteronormative marriage that's 10 to 50, 60 years long, probably she's compromising a lot more. And she certainly feels like she is. And if you are compromising in the day to day, what that really means is that you're prioritizing your partner's experience and the peace over who you are and what matters to you. And you get in the habit of basically leaving aspects of yourself outside the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a million mini amputations of the soul. And that sounds dramatic. And in any given moment, it doesn't need to be, although sometimes it can feel that way. But the
Mm-hmm.
cumulative effect is that we are disconnected from ourselves. And it
Right.
doesn't even matter, because what the topic is, like the example of the runnier scrambled eggs, like, do you need runnier scrambled eggs to be happy? No, you do not. But turning away from your desire, that is like Chinese water torture. And I don't mean to be so dramatic. I just mean to be clear that it's one little drop at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a cumulative effect. Not that we then necessarily feel tortured, but I want to draw that parallel, because in general, we're not used to honoring our desires. So we close off bit by bit by bit. And the fact is that when we get to the bedroom, as women, as human beings, we don't have some switch that we can then flip in order to bring all of ourselves in our luxurious and unapologetic fullness,
Right.
which is one of the ingredients for passion. And if we're used to just bringing a narrowed version of ourselves to interactions throughout the day, then we are bringing a narrowed version of ourselves in the bedroom. And I think that this is one of the most fundamental causes of the leveling out of romance and passion. Well, romance is a little bit different, but let me say a leveling out of the intimacy, sexual, erotic, and sensual.
Mm-hmm.
There is also the aspect, which I don't talk about that much, but I do want to mention, which is that when we are in a doing mode, we have all kinds of things to get done in our work lives and in our professional lives, that energy of accomplishment and doing and competence, that is also the antithesis to passion, because passion is not about doing, it's about a state of being.
But how do you shut that out? I mean, I know everyone is so busy, and especially like I have that feeling like at the end of the day, you're so busy all day. And finally at the end of the night, you get to bed and you collapse, right? I mean, how do you get, and also you have so many thoughts running through your head about what you did today, what you have to do tomorrow. So how do you, I mean, is that part of the emotional piece of it? Or
Actually,
is that
I
part of?
think of that as part of sensual intimacy. So maybe I'll just go sequentially and we'll make sure to come back to that very point. So,
Okay.
in terms of emotional intimacy, like it is lovely to know your spouse or your partner well. And
Mm-hmm.
part of companionship and a stable relationship is knowing one another. But the problem with that is that both of you continue to grow and have new experiences. And really, I think of one of the most important flavors of that early feeling of being in love
Mm-hmm.
is curiosity, massive curiosity. Who is this person? What's their favorite vegetable? What was their second grade teacher's name? What does he or she want to be 5, 10, 20 years from now? Like there's this desire to know one another that
Right.
is part of the feeling of being in love. And yes, it is lovely to feel you know your partner. I mean, of course you know him,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the most important ways to deepen emotional intimacy, if you want to feel seen and cherished and excited about the conversations, not just because they're comfortable, but because there's a little spontaneity and something unexpected in them, the key really is to cultivate curiosity and ask open-ended questions that you haven't been asking. And so the first step, if you and your spouse are kind of distant, is to ask open-ended questions. And if you already have a really good rapport, ask open-ended questions and make a point of revealing what's inside you with vulnerability without waiting for him to ask. If you wait for him to ask, it might never happen. But if you go first
Mm-hmm.
and share. In fact, I'll just tell a quick story that I gave a talk once, and there was a woman who'd been married for 32 years.
Yes.
And she heard me talk about the importance of vulnerability and creating emotional intimacy and how that sets the foundation for sensual passion. And she said to me afterwards privately, but what if he just isn't interested? I've tried to open up and he's just not interested. And I said to her, then be more vulnerable. You need to be more vulnerable. He's not a narcissist. You don't have a toxic relationship. If you're not getting the kind of connection you want, you go first and be more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait for him to ask. And so I didn't know her. She just was in the audience while I was speaking, but I happened to be in an event and she was there too a month later. And she came up to me and said, with like gentle tears dropping, this was a very accomplished, competent woman.
Yes.
And she was a corporate executive. And she said, I said to my husband, sometimes I feel small and unimportant. And I could tell from how she was talking with me that she found the courage and she was really vulnerable in how she said this.
Wow.
And he turned to her and said, me too.
Really? Nice.
And so in this decades-long marriage, her choosing to share something in this vulnerable way led to what definitely was one of the most vulnerable moments in their whole marriage.
Wow.
And it happened because she dialed up her own vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine when you share something that is so much more vulnerable than you're used to sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you're distant, just start with asking open-ended questions and getting to know one another. And if you already have a really collaborative relationship, then dial up your vulnerable shares, not about picking up eggs at the grocery store. I don't know why I'm using eggs so much, but whatever.
Are you hungry? Are you hungry?
I just had eggs for breakfast and my breakfast time in California. Anyway, so just be aware of where you are. So if what you want is just a little more attention because you're disconnected, ask open-ended questions.
Okay.
And get to know one another. If you've already got the rapport and you want just more intimacy, then be more vulnerable. And just this exchange, I didn't have the conversation with her, but I know from other experiences, coaching hundreds of other couples and myself, that having a conversation like that just naturally gets the sensual juices flowing more. There's just more of you connecting with one another. So that is really emotional intimacy. And now let's go back to your question about, okay, it's the end of the day. I've been focused on doing so many things, and either I didn't finish or I did, but either way, I'm starting to think about tomorrow's stuff too.
Right.
And that brings us to sensual intimacy. And I think many women believe that it's their partner's responsibility to touch them in such a way that they drop all that and can feel and be in the moment. If you would only look at me and touch me in such a way and bring me roses every evening, well, then of course I'd show up that way. Well, first of all, even if he did do that, if you've got your mind on the to-do list, your mind will still default to that.
Yes.
You know, you can be kissing and you'll remember, oh, I need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
This is a reality. However, when it comes to sensuality.
Hi, my friend. Kavita here. Do you often feel blocked from moving forward? We all feel that way at times. These are referred to as energy blocks. I've created a short, actionable PDF guide to help you release your negative energy blocks. Click the link in the description to download it now for free. Now, let's get back to the episode.
You, as a woman, are responsible for reconnecting with your own body. That's not your husband's job, and it's not even an option. You need to have the direct relationship to your body and your own sensuality and bring that to the table. And when you do, you'll find your husband is suddenly a much better lover. Now, how to do that? Well, it depends where you're starting. So the first thing is to be aware of what I just said.
Right.
And then the next thing usually involves some curiosity towards yourself. And one of the things that I recommend, which is so simple, at least it seems that way, but it's actually very profound.
Yes.
And I like this because it can be done discreetly. It can be done under the table. It can be done in front of people and no one else will notice. But I'll describe it in detail in case someone is only listening. But if you take your right hand, if you're right dominant, and very slowly touch the inside of your left wrist, and I mean very slowly with the lightest pressure, barely touching it, it will bring you into your body and into a sense of being a woman. And when I do this so slowly, you can hear my voice has changed. Yes. My breathing is slower. I'm not faking it, but because I'm actually feeling, I mean, you can touch any part of you. It's just that the inside of the wrist, I love it because it's discreet, like it's normal to touch your wrist. It doesn't look like I'm doing a sexual act. And also the inside is so sensitive. The outside is a little bit tougher, relatively, even with soft, smooth skin. The inside is more sensitive. And the key here is typically if we are touching ourselves in any way, washing our face or gently touching the inside of our wrist, whatever, our attention is usually on the fingers or the hand that is doing the touching.
Right.
And I'm inviting you to pay attention to the wrist, which is being touched, which is basically in the receiving position, even though you're in all positions as you do this.
Right.
I taught this at a workshop, and a woman contacted me later and said, is it normal for someone who's been sexually abused as a child to be unable to do this? And the answer is, it definitely can be. So this is something that looks so benign, but in order to do this, you need to be in your body, able to have attention on your pleasure and experience the sensation. And the fact is that when your attention is on your sensations, it is not on your to-do list. This is not a both and, this is an either or. So this is one way. You can take a warm bath.
Right.
You can put on some music and dance in a way that's improvisational and just flows through you, or you can run around. Like, you can listen to some erotica. There are actually all kinds of erotica options specifically for women who often are very responsive to the oral erotica more so than porn, although that obviously is an option for some. The point is, the way to get out of the doing mode is to come into your body as a sensual experience. It could be, actually, I coached a woman, and one of my main assignments to her when we first started working together, and the reason she wanted to work with me, was to learn how to be in her body as a woman. And the first thing I said was to put her face lotion on in the morning, her face cream, in a way like that was loving. To just, rather than it being some practical activity that she was doing to just get the stuff from the jar onto her face in order to move on to the next task, to put it on with the same kind of loving touch that she used when her children were young.
That's nice. I think that kind of comes to what I guess my next point is that sometimes what we think is that in order to put the spark back into our relationship, we have to maybe look better or wear that sexy lingerie, or we have to go away on romantic vacations or the weekends away. But my question is, you're telling us how to kind of sustain this intimacy every day, like in little ways, by first getting in touch with yourself and understanding what makes you feel good. And you can do that every day. It doesn't have to be on a trip to Hawaii or just because you're wearing that sexy lingerie. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really happy you brought that up, because I think a lot of people think, okay, in order to have a passionate evening, yes, it's sexy lingerie, shave your legs, or go on a vacation. And all of those things are fabulous.
Yes.
Like, they work for the short term.
Right.
They don't actually transform the relationship. They just help you create some number of special experiences.
It's kind of temporary though, right? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
We want it to be every day. We don't want it to be a temporary thing. Like, you can go away for a week and have the best time, best sex ever. But when you come back home, everything comes back to normal. So the question is, how do we bring that into our everyday lives? Right.
Yeah. And actually, I'm not like, I think vacations are awesome, but I'm much more interested in transforming every day, like raising the baseline rather than having these spikes of deliciousness.
Right.
And one of the things that I really love to say, because it's true, is that in the context of a long-term relationship, everything which isn't sex is foreplay. And what that means is that every single interaction that you have, it either with your partner, it either adds to the connection or it moves away from connection. There's no real neutral. Neutral is effectively moving away from connection. So I want to just layer this all together again. So emotional intimacy is essential. And we've talked a little bit about how to cultivate that. There's so much more to this, but this is the beginning. And this is why I give talks and then people work with me for 8 weeks or sometimes longer, because it's a matter of implementing and adjusting and growing in it. But the way to really get started in cultivating emotional intimacy is asking open-ended questions and being more vulnerable. And simultaneously, the way to develop sensual intimacy is by you bringing your attention to yourself as a sensual woman and being compassionate and kind. There's no magic formula. There's nothing missing in who you are. Whoever you are listening, there is nothing missing. It is a practice. It is a journey. It is an exploration. And so start by slowly touching the inside of your wrist or any other way you would like. And when you have the emotional intimacy and you have the sensual intimacy, and you keep in mind that every interaction either builds connection or detracts from it. And it's not that you need to be sexy while deciding who's going to pick up the kids. No, but there's a way to do it, which is kind and generous and loving. Not generous in that it takes a long time or it's wrapped in a bow, but there's just a way to do it which is honoring and a way which is more critical. I think women are unbelievably more critical of spouses than we perceive. And the only reason I say that is that once I started hearing women I was coaching, the way they talk to their husbands when I was there, but nobody else was. And I was like, how can she do that? And then I realized, oh, that is how I talk to my husband. So I cleaned up how I do that and I see it. So there is a lot more we can do to be respectful and loving in our day-to-day interactions. And all of these things layered together, emotional intimacy, sensual intimacy, and treating all the interactions in a way that builds connection rather than detracts from it, then sets up, it's all the ingredients for erotic intimacy, for passion that doesn't require a romantic getaway. That can add to it, but it's not required. It means that as you sit across the dinner table, it's not just like, oh, it's nice at the end of the day. Like there can be electricity. We have 4 children and right now 3 are at home. And we have moments where we just look at one another. The kids don't perceive it. And I can feel that we both know what's going to happen later that night.
That's amazing. That's awesome. That's really great.
And actually, that's what I wanted, because once I got to where I could experience sensuality and sexuality and feel really alive when I was at a retreat, and then I would come home and making dinner and taking care of kids, and I didn't feel like the same woman. And so I think the most important work that I have done in my life is to close that gap and coach others in how to do the same.
It's so important what you're saying. And I think one of the things that really resonates with me is the speaking with love and caring, because we often, as we go in our busy day lives, we forget that. And if we just stop and talk with love and caring to the ones that we love the most, I think that would really go a long way and make a big difference.
Yeah. And we're not just talking about fighting.
Yes.
we're talking about something, it's sort of like salt in the food. We're talking about something that is very subtle, but very impactful. Like if I go into the kitchen and something is not the way I like it, but my husband, he might know I like it differently or he might not, but there's a way that I can just let it go. There's a way that I can make a request, which is honoring of his intentions. And there is the way, which is actually easy and common, and just say, I wish you would have done this, or some version of that.
Right.
And the little extra effort to say it with the clear communication that I know he means well makes all the difference.
Is this what you mean by conscious partnership? Or is that, I read a little bit about what you had said, and I love when you said that we should treat our relationships as the vehicle for personal transformation.
Yes, that is exactly what I mean.
Yeah. And that really resonated with me, because that's really what Power Purpose Play is all about, is especially as we age, we're searching for a new way of doing things and for our own reinvention. So is it possible for this conscious partnership to really help in our own reinvention?
Yes, it's not only helpful, it's essential.
Okay.
Because here's the thing, when we are in an intimate relationship, when we are married or in a long-term partnership, we will be triggered. And the unconscious way of handling that is to either do our damnedest to ignore it and it comes out sideways anyway, or to really focus on how our partner can and should change so that we don't have to feel that way, whatever the trigger is. So in other words, let's say my husband says something or does something, or who he is has me feel angry or hurt or neglected, whatever feeling I have. The unconscious way of handling that is to just not even be aware and be reactive. The more common, but in my opinion, still unconscious way is to want him to change so I don't have to feel that way.
Right.
And that works, but then you end up with a relationship which is conflict-free and passion-free and essentially fueled by compromise as one of the strong values. But in a conscious partnership, when my husband says or does things that have me feel anger, unimportant, taken for granted, sad, resentful, whatever the flavor is, I know that I am feeling that way first and foremost because of me. Now, that doesn't get him totally off the hook because we're in it together.
Right.
But I'm not looking to have him change so I feel better. I am looking to take this experience and understand why it was triggering. Who am I? What wounding did I have in childhood? What belief do I have about myself or him or our relationship that had that be something that was hurtful for me? And what I'm saying is very sophisticated, because very often when someone starts this work, it's like, well, of course what he said was hurtful. Actually, not necessarily so. He could say the same thing to somebody else and it wouldn't hurt as much.
Right.
But when we treat our relationships as a vehicle for personal growth, I'm going to look at what internal environment I have that has me feel the way I feel, and why certain things matter to me and other ones aren't that big a deal, even though I know it would matter to somebody else. And because of that, I genuinely am at the point, after years of deep work along these lines, when my husband says something and it is triggering for me, I am triggered.
Yes.
And also I'm excited, because it's an invitation to get to know a whole part of my soul that I haven't had access to. and wouldn't have had access to if he hadn't done that annoying thing that triggered me, that opened the door into this whole new room inside me, which is messy and rotten smelling and icky and unpleasant. But it was there already. His triggering me provides the invitation to discover that. And then I can clean up that room and declutter it and fill it with flowers and sweet smelling furniture.
And there goes your personal transformation, right? That's what you mean.
That's
by
right.
that. Exactly.
So I don't necessarily thank him for triggering me.
Right.
But it is understood between us that if one of us feels triggered, like if I'm the one doing the triggering, I'm not going to take this approach. I'm going to look at how am I being and how can I be more kind, and why did I say that? Like what was happening in me that I was mean then? And if he's the one doing the triggering, it's not always my first response. I am not a saint. But in among my early responses is looking at what this is going to teach me about who I am and what there is for me to heal and grow and become more powerful.
That's incredible. I mean, I think that's the whole thing is this, if we really are in tune, if we take it, everything that comes to us and we look at how we can improve ourselves and why did I react to the situation and how can I react in a more positive way, that only makes ourselves better, right? It only improves ourselves. Yeah.
And I have no question that couple that I referred to at the beginning of this conversation that had the new awakening at 53 years of marriage, I have no question that that's because they still trigger one another. At the point at which we're not triggering one another, and by triggering, I don't mean some big dramatic thing, but at the point at which we're not at least having some flare-ups of annoyance or something, then we're not impacting one another in a way that leads to growth.
Right. This is incredible. There's so much unpacking here, but I think what I got out of this is that the three emotions, the three intimacies, asking open-ended questions, being vulnerable, and you are responsible for connecting with your own body and sensuality. Those are some of the things that with the emotional intimacy and the sensual intimacy, you can't have erotic intimacy unless you have those two first, right? And
Vita, that is the most elegant, accurate summary. It's so beautiful. And the whole rest of the conversation is just context so that what you just said is clear.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, you obviously articulated so well that I so appreciate it. Is there any final thoughts or any words of wisdom that you can give to women who are listening in midlife that are really wanting to have that spark back in the relationship? I know you've said a lot, but maybe just a final word.
Yeah, I want to repeat that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And I think that as a culture anyway, we are so excited and celebrate growth and learning in the earliest years of life when children roll over and they can feed themselves and first words and complete sentences and walking and even learning to read and riding a bike. Obviously, these are moments of joy and celebration.
Right.
The fact is that throughout life, we continue to have all kinds of growth and learning like that, unless we turn away from it. But my oldest is 24, and I have yet to kind of feel bored by her growth and learning. Like, yes, I don't clap the way I did when she learned to walk, but her soul and her self-awareness and how she makes decisions, it all continues to grow. And that's true of all four of my children. And I expect to feel that way as long as I live and am cognizant. And I say all of this because if you're listening and you have an incredible, juicy relationship and you just got a little bit to spice it up a little bit more, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And if you are like so many other people and your relationship, you love one another, you plan to live the rest of your lives together, although maybe you let yourself wonder every now and then if that, like, look at the pros and cons of that. But in general, you have a loving companionship, a conflict-free and passion-free relationship where either you're having sex, but it's not as often, or the quality isn't what you want, or there's a way in which something just feels a little bit dead. I invite you to look at yourself the way you would look at a young child and be compassionate that the growth and learning, it's not some magic instant cure. It's really a way of life. And so I hope you take from this one or two things that you'll employ that will take you further down your path, and then you'll find your next things. That this isn't some instant cure. It's ongoing growth and learning with yourself and in your relationship as long as you live.
And it can happen at any age.
For sure.
As your couple there who are in their 50th year. So that's incredible. And I so appreciate all these amazing insights. And I'm sure that our audience would want to learn more. And if they do want to learn more, please tell us how to reach you and what kind of programs you have. I'm sure that people would love to hear about them.
Okay, well, I really welcome everyone to come to my website, which is alexandrastockwell.com, and everything I'm going to say is found there. I have a program. It's just $33 US. It's called Desired: Awaken the Woman Within. And it's 3 days of training on how to get to know what your desires are, how to make friends with your desires, and how to ask for what you want so that it feels good to give it to you. And I also have my signature program that I'm just in love with. It really contains all of my core principles. It's called the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program. And it's designed to be done by couples or by just one person who is in a partnership. And that is available too. And it's just lots and lots of ways of looking at things and ways of implementing everything that we've been speaking about today.
It sounds wonderful. Well, I have learned a ton, and I might just check out some of your programs myself.
I would love to have you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Alexandra. It's just been just a wealth of information, and I just love talking to you. It's felt like a conversation with a friend, so I really appreciate that.
I'm so glad.
And for everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope the session really did help you in your path to your own reinvention. We've had some wonderful tips to really get to know yourself as a sensual being. And so remember, that can happen at any age or circumstances. So we all have the power within us to reinvent ourselves to be our best selves. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Alexandra, and I'm sure you did as well. Her advice on the importance of cultivating long-term relationships is so refreshing to understand and implement. As she says, the key to passion, fulfillment, intimacy, and success isn't compromise. It's being unwilling to compromise, because when both people feel free to be themselves and know how to love and be loved for exactly who they are, the relationship is juicy, nourishing, and deeply satisfying. Here are her key takeaways. Number 1, relationships can continue to improve. They don't have to plateau or start to diminish. Having fantastic relationships is a completely learnable skill. 2, sex is a final, delicious frontier that comes with self-knowledge, self-acceptance, and the capacity to develop emotional intimacy. Number 3, there are 3 different types of intimacy. 1, emotional. 2, sensual. And 3, erotic. Emotional and sensual intimacy forms the basis for erotic intimacy. 4, The best way to cultivate emotional intimacy is to 1. Ask open-ended questions, and 2. Be more vulnerable. 5. When we are in the doing mode, that is the antithesis to passion, because passion is not about doing, it's about a state of being. 6. In the context of a long-term relationship, everything that isn't sex is foreplay. 7. Conscious partnership is when we treat our relationships as vehicles for personal transformation. It's essential for our own reinvention. 8. At the point in which we are not triggering one another, then we're not growing. 9. It's not an instant cure. It's a way of life. It's ongoing growth and learning with yourself and your relationship as long as you live. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I strive to bring to you every week different perspectives and topics that we face in midlife. A recent Forbes article celebrating women 50 over 50 should tell you that we are just getting started, my friends. If you're curious and learning more about Power Purpose Play, visit our website at powerpurposeplay.ca. We are in the midst of our signature program, It's My Time Now, How to Rediscover Yourself in Midlife, with some incredible women taking part. If you would like to be put on the waiting list for our upcoming session, contact me at kavita@powerpurposeplay.ca. Share this podcast with your friends if you enjoy it. There really is no better compliment. In love and light, until next week, take care.